ขอบพระคุณอาจารย์ธงรบอาจารย์รัฐพลสถาบันราชนครินทร์และอาจารย์ลันวรัตน์ที่เชิญมาพูดในวันนี้ค่ะดีใจมากที่หนังสือได้กลับบ้านค่ะ แล้วก็ดีใจมากที่จะเปิดหนังสือได้ที่เกษตรศาสตร์ค่ะOkay, my talk is in English. I'm so happy to see so many familiar faces and also so many new faces. Okay. When the novelist P.M. Virabhorn Nitiprabha takes me to see Tajiu Opera in Talat Noi, in the Talat Noi neighborhood in December 2023, we sit next to a woman who claims that she is the only one who can, in fact, understand the language of the performance. When Ajahn Tao Napong Rakapan and I meet in the same month at the Hiataiki coffee shop, we find an entirely new venue that nevertheless bases its identity on the history of the 74-year-old cafe. What does it mean to inhabit a history and sometimes an identity which has either already disappeared or can never be recovered in original form? That is what In the Mood for Texture set out to ask when it explored bars, hotels, and other historical buildings, as well as contemporary cinema, writing, and digital media in Bangkok. The book takes seriously the revival of Chinese pasts and colonial aesthetics in a hospitality industry that exploits the historical materiality of the neighborhoods Sampantawong, Pomprap, and Bang Rak, while also drawing on the aesthetics of Hong Kong and Shanghai colonial modernities at the same time. So this is a mashup, Bangkok, Hong Kong, Shanghai. But the revival also manifests in media, literature, and films, such as Nawapon Thamrong Ratanarit's film How to Ting, that tells the story of an architect whose radical house renovation eliminates all family history, and by extension, a Chinese Thai history as well. And the cover of the book comes from this film, How to Ting. My example today comes from chapter 5, which examines Virabhorn Nitiprabha's second novel, พุทธศักราชอัสดงกับทรงจำของแมวกุหลาบดำ that came out in Thai in 2016 and in Kongridi's English translation in 2022. Virabhorn's work exemplifies the ways in which Southeast Asian cultural production revives Chinese pasts with a difference. Her second novel tells the story of 4 generations of a Chinese Thai family, and as it does so, retells Chinese and Thai history from the early 20th century until the 1970s. It earned her the prestigious C. Wright Award, the region's highest literary award, for the second time. The novel is especially noteworthy for 3 things. It inserts literature into a change of historical exchanges between China and Thailand. The author thereby propels into motion received understandings of the origins and derivations of culture. 2, in the course, the novel undertakes a rescaling of the weight and dimension of China in relation to Thailand. Thailand becomes larger, China becomes smaller. 3, the novel's fantastic mode of storytelling and history-telling achieves a depersonalization of memory. พุทธศักราช undertakes a far-reaching decentralization of memory and asks in a radical way, who is the subject of memory and who is the subject of history? Weaving between imaginative invocation and concrete history telling, Weerapan's novel reworks the notion of Chinese identity through a dynamic of circulation in which literary work takes on life and agency in travels across eras, countries, and political systems. พุทธศักราชอัสดง tells of the manifold cruel displacements of the 20th century in China and Thailand. As Weerapan describes the purpose of her novel, the ambition was to humanize the people from one of the most complicated times in our history who left behind nothing more than their stories, end of quote. Titled Refuge of the Soul or Sanctuary of Souls in Gongrad's translation, Chapter 12 tells the story of a PRC-born son named Hong, who never meets his father, Tong, the patriarch of the story, because he had left China before Hong's birth to return to his other first family in Thailand. Drawing on her own family history, Weerapan tells the story of China's 1966 to 76 Cultural Revolution. Hong and his mother become victims of the violence, and the 8-year-old boy finds himself orphaned. All that sustains him, his refuge of the soul, are a family photograph from Thailand, a map, and a 16-page letter from the first wife of his father in Thailand. The long letter that vividly describes the family's life in a small town in Thailand is written in literary Chinese by a commercial writer in the local market. Hong is drawn to the imaginative language of the letter, studies literature, and becomes a university lecturer and writer. When China opens, he sets out to find his father, Tong, in Thailand. When Hong finally finds his family's house, its inhabitants are long gone. He can never find them again. Upon his return to China, however, he writes out the until then secret story of the refuge of his soul. His novel, The Lone Refuge of the Soul, earns him nominations for the Nobel Prize. The cover image ofพุทธศักราช first edition can be understood as referencing the photograph that sustained the orphan Hong through his hard youth during the Cultural Revolution. But the image also intimates that Hong's family in Thailand remained unknown, their faces are obscured, and that history remains unatoned. In the chapter Refuge of the Soul, Weerapan proceeds to redress some of the violence of the Cultural Revolution, under which the fantastic writer, wuxia writer Wang Tulu is killed in China. She does so by letting another piece of literature, the novel produced by Hong decades later, continue the work of the type of fantastic literary imagination that the Cultural Revolution sought to eliminate. Crucially, Chinese literature in Refuge of the Soul circulates through the space of Thailand, as we read of the market scribe who writes letters in Chinese for a fee. This scribe composed the literary style account of daily life that great-grandmother Sangyam had sent out to her husband's second wife, Hong's mother in China. The way in which forbidden Chinese literature is transmitted to the son Hong is thus by way of the Thai market scribe who, quote, honed his literary skills by reading the Crane Iron Pentalogy by Wang Tulu repeatedly over 10 years, end of quote, and composed the long letter from the Thailand-based first wife to the second wife in China. China does not appear as a default home inพุทธศักราช. The boy Hong can find a home only in the fictional space that the letter and photograph from Thailand create for him. It is only literary language that is invested with the capacity to produce belonging in this story. In a keynote speech at a 2019 literary festival in Kunming in China, Weeraphan does envision the homecoming of a Thai-produced literary text to China again, namely her own novel. But neither her novel nor her speech run the risk of declaring the diaspora the repository of a tradition that is then repatriated. Rather, Weeraphan's work defamiliarizes the origins of Chinese literature through outlining this literature's transnational Thai detour. Ku.th. even renders a putatively bourgeois literature non-bourgeois through the figure of the market scribe. In the story, it is through the commissioned letter from Thailand and later Hong's novel that a Chinese literary tradition survives. Finally, Weeraphan's novel itself also continues the task of writing a Chinese literature and history that succumbs neither to the dictates of PRC cultural policy nor to that of Thailand's military regimes and ruling classes. It is literature that can salvage lives torn from homes, persons torn from other persons, and dreams rendered void by historical upheaval. On a primary level, this literature is written in Thai. However, its Sinophone, Sinographic, and Sinotropic instantiations in the long letter written in a Thai market and in Weeraphan's own novel are of notable importance. Here, the Sinographic does not manifest in concretely visible embodied form. Rather, to the contemporary reader, it appears in the form of a trope, representing a vehicle that transports crucial intellectual and affective content across territories, eras, and political systems. Yet its non-literal appearance signifies the difference of Southeast Asia, where Chineseness surpasses language and patronym. In the present of the novel, Chinese history is condensed in the expansive imagination of the child Dao, who throughout the main body of the story holds all the historical and personal histories and losses of the family in his persona as plenitude. In Ku.th. Contemporary Chineseness is thus instantiated in the figure of an imaginative child, very lively child. The reader witnesses Dao growing into a life that is very much his own, but also contains the multitudes of stories of those who came before him. The novel ends with a surprising twist, leaving open whether Dao is an actual child or the mere materialization of memory and desire. As such, he would represent a de-individualized conception of memory, a capacity at once more ephemeral and more enduring than any conventional notion of historical memory. With the delineation of this contemporary figure of personhood, Weeraphan does not abstract from or disregard Chineseness. Rather, the novel de-essentializes identity without disavowing the traumas of migrant and post-migrant lives. Ku.th. does not shy away from centering the failures of love, betrayals of family, and the cruelly intertwined histories of China and Thailand. At the same time, the novel as a whole playfully propels nation and region into motion in a way that counters the idea of the reconvergence of center and diaspora. It's not Thailand coming home into the fold of the Chinese nation. And in a way that undermines the unequal distribution of power among different regional players. Weeraphan's novel, speeches, and interviews on the one hand leave readers with little to grasp onto with regard to a Chinese identity in Thailand. In Weeraphan's novel, no roots, origins, or home remain. Family ties have become lost, loosened, or are disputed. Writers have been killed and languages disappeared. But in the world imagined by the Southeast Asian writer, Chineseness has also embarked on travels that keep it constantly in motion and compelled to make new homes, roots, and alliances. In this literature, the Southeast Asian location of Thailand does not merely reproduce China's centrality. And yet, while Southeast Asia decenters China, it also does not merely vilify it. Rather, it produces a new perspective on what has at times been thought of as a minority identity, as well as on the hegemonic nature of a new regionality. As, in quotes, not quite, although very much family, end of quote, Southeast Asia's relation to China as a geopolitical entity or as fantasy is never entirely predetermined. A Southeast Asian point of departure thus deconstructs and reconstructs understandings of Chineseness, reconfiguring notions of centrality and marginality, as well as of fidelity to neoliberal trans-Asia projects. Both nation and region become fissured, de-unified for a moment, opening up opportunity for imagining belonging, embodiment, and relationality anew. I think I'll stop here. Thank you.